Now let's run some macros with arguments in them. So I have 3 data sets here, data 1, data 2, and data 3, and they all have 5 variables, x1 through x5. I've already got them set up for us. And I created this macro that's going to run a procedure, any procedure basically, and it can run it on any data set, and it's going to run it on variables x1 through up to x5, however many variables we want to run it on. So to call it, I can call this proceed, and then I start entering in the macro variables that I've defined up here. You can see how I've got data equals, proc equals, and vars equals. So if I want to run this on variables x1 through x3, I'm going to define vars to be 3. If I want to run a print procedure, I'm going to define proc to be print, and then it'll run proc print. And then I wanted to run this procedure on data set 1, so it'll say data equals 1. So it'll run this procedure on data set 1. So when I run it, this is what happens. It just runs that print procedure on the first 3 variables. And similarly, I can run, say, a means procedure on all 5 variables if I want to, and it just prints it out there easily for me. You can run a univariate procedure on the first 2 variables similarly. So that's just to get you thinking. But this style of parameter, where I'm putting equal signs after the name of each parameter that I've defined, is called using keyword parameters. Here's another kind of parameter. These are positional parameters. Now you have to be a little bit more careful with positional parameters. See how I started with the data variable, then I did the procedure variable, and then the number of variables variable. So now when I try to call this macro, I have to define all of these macro variables very carefully. I have to put the name of the data set first because that was the first variable listed, then the name of the procedure, and then the name of the variables. I wouldn't be able to switch this order around among these 3 things when I called this macro because I don't have equal signs in front of things. With the equal signs, it doesn't matter what order you put things in. You're stating the name of the macro variable you're defining, you're putting an equal sign there, and then you say, well, I want to do this on data set 1. Whereas here, we just write the word 1, because order is important with this kind of parameter. So I kind of prefer these keyword parameters where you're putting an equal sign, just to keep everybody from getting mixed up. So here's another example. Suppose we have some data on the amount of money that professors are making for several years. So we've got different professors, their associate and assistant professors, and so on and so forth. And I would like to plot things out, but I'm going to call this for 2 different groups of people. One plot is going to be for professors who started before 1980, and another plot is going to be for professors who started after 1980. And so I'm going to create these 2 data sets made from the original data set. Each data set contains their respective observations. And then I'll call the plot procedure on that particular data set. And the plot procedure is defined up here in this macro, and I've got all these nice little things. I've got titles, I've got labels, I've got the axes defined. All kinds of beautiful things are going on in this proc plot. And by the way, you notice things don't turn blue within the macro, although things do turn purple. So this may be... Right here, this is a pretty simple program. To type it out twice wouldn't be a big deal, but if you had something that was many, many lines long and you had to run plot procedures for 15 different data sets, this might be a little bit more feasible way of doing that. So I can just call this plot procedure real quickly, and it'll just run it. So now you can see we've got two different plots, one for those first few years and then one for the last few years. A way of doing something similar is you could run this macro so that you created these macro variables when you created the macro. So note that I'm mixing and matching two different types of variables here. I've got the keyword parameters here and here, and then that very first parameter is a positional parameter, so we have to be careful about putting the dataset name first. I'm going to call this macro on mydata.ranks, but then I could mix and match yvar and name if I wanted to. Here I've just listed them in the order that they were given in just to keep things straight. And then it's going to run this on the same data set a couple of times, once on the full professors, once on the associate professors, and just run this plot. And so you can see that it just runs the plot real quickly and easily, similarly to before.